So now we're going to come on to the details of these three MEL tools that I introduced earlier. So we have, just as a reminder, we have the pathway to change, which is the written section of the application form, the theory of change diagram, which is uploaded as a PDF, and the log frame, which can be uploaded as a Word or Excel document using our templates. So why are we using these tools? Well, first of all, it really helps for creating clear statements of your overall objectives so that when we receive your application, the Ocean Expert Committee can see straight away what your project's about. It will help you to understand what needs to change and in what sequence to reach your objective, but it will also help the expert committee understand this. And it will help you to start to form that plan on what you need to keep track of as your project becomes live. It's also a good opportunity to work out what assumptions you're making around your project design, identifying who else is going to influence that change process, and build that common understanding across your team of what you're hoping to achieve with your project and who is doing what, where are the roles and responsibilities within the team. And most of all, we hope that these tools will help you to select the right solution to the problem that you have identified. So the pathway to change. You can think of this section as the what, how, and why of your project. This is essential for communicating what your project is, what problem you're trying to address, how and why your approach will lead to the desired change. So there's some key questions you might want to consider when you're writing this section. That's first of all, how and why will your project activities lead to change? What assumptions are you making that are critical to the success of your project? How will the project activities lead you to achieve your end of project goal? How will the project contribute to the marine environment and poverty reduction beyond its lifetime? And how will the project contribute to promoting equality between persons of different gender and social characteristics? And these are all key things that the expert committee will be looking at to understand the quality of your application. So when you're thinking about what the challenge is, it's really important to communicate and demonstrate that you understand what the specific problem that you're going to address is. So remember to think about who and what is most affected, and identify what specific aspect you're planning to address with your project activities. It's really important here to already think about the evidence that is existing around that problem. So remember to think about the key drivers and root causes, who is affected and to what extent they're affected, and how others have tried to improve the situation. We also really recommend that you look out for what has worked and not worked in the past. This is part of what I mentioned earlier about evaluation. You want to make sure that you're not repeating approaches that have failed in the past, or if you are repeating this approach that has failed in the past, you'll need to justify why in your specific context you think that approach is going to be successful. We ask you to provide evidence in the application. So just a note on evidence here. This can include scientific literature and data, but it also can include case studies, past evaluation reports, stakeholder interviews, reports from past projects and practitioners, and integrate local knowledge. In terms of how to include this evidence in your application, we recognize that there's a limited word count, so we don't have any kind of specific requirements about how you should cite these references, but it just needs to be clear to the Ocean Expert Committee where to be able to find that evidence if they wanted to look it up and make their own assessment of how robust that evidence is. So, for example, if it was a scientific article, you could at least present the author name, year, and the journal it was published in. Moving on to the why of your project. There's some key guiding questions here to help you think around this. So first of all, does your project actually tackle the root cause of the specific problem? Does it tackle more than one root cause? Are your activities relevant and suitable for this particular context? Again, coming to what's worked elsewhere is that might not work in your specific context, and if and you have to provide some evidence that why you think it will work or what you've done to modify to suit your own context. You should also be thinking, again, who and what will benefit and to what extent, because one of the main aims is to really benefit people and reduce poverty in its many different aspects. You should also be thinking about why now is the right time to implement the kind of activities you're planning, and really have a focus on how your approach will promote gender equality and social inclusion. You should be thinking about whether your activities and the expected benefits that you hope to see are going to be inclusive of marginalized groups and people across all parts of the society that you're working with. Coming on to the how of your project, the pathway to change section really needs to have that general overview of why your project is, the how, what, and why of your project, as I said, but it's also about showing us the big picture. We want to understand how the inputs that you put in, for example, the funding, your human and financial resources, and the activities that you lead, that these are the processes which turn your inputs into outputs, like training and surveys or habitat restoration activities. We want to understand that flow from inputs all the way up to impact. And we're going to come to the definitions of these different elements of the project, but I think it's really important to recognize when you're writing this section that as you move away from the inputs and activities that you've planned up to the impact level, there are certain things that will be outside of the sphere of control of your project. There'll be a lot of external factors. So really you need to lay out what's within the project sphere of influence and what's outside of it. So moving from inputs to outputs, your sphere of control starts to diminish, and then the external factors will become a lot more important, which is why we ask you to also consider these and outline the assumptions you're making about your project in this section. Just a little bit more on gender equality and social inclusion. It's really important that projects embed gender equality and social inclusion considerations into their project design right from the beginning, because projects that do this tend to have more equitable outcomes because they've understood and reflected the needs of all parts of the community. So there's some key guiding questions to ask yourself when you're looking at your project design. First of all, remember to consider the prevailing gender and social norms in the country that you're working. Think about division of labour and access and control of resources and people's ability to participate in decision making. How will all of this affect the project? Will it affect what you're able to achieve? And how will you engage with stakeholders, understanding that particular context? You also need to think about your impacts, whether you're going to have any unintended negative or positive effects on the different parts of society. So here it's talking about girls, boys, women, and men, but this equally could talk about other marginalized groups, so perhaps migrant communities or people with disabilities, depending on your project context. So thinking about access to and control of assets that might be relevant to your particular project. And then think about how your project specifically can ensure that you're giving equitable opportunities to all to actually have some influence and participate in the project itself and help to make decisions. Think about whether your interventions actually address the underlying barriers that exclude certain groups, and think about how you can avoid any unintended negative consequences and come up with some mitigation actions. Moving on to the theory of change. So the theory of change diagram is something that is going to support your pathway to change section. So this is basically the visual representation of your pathway to change. The diagram should be showing how your change is expected to come about through the project. And a good theory of change is flexible, able to capture the complicated and real world nature of projects. It's also a really helpful visual tool for your team, but also for the expert committee to kind of understand that you've shown that you understand the logic and flow of your project. It's a great place to present your assumptions about what you want or expect to happen and what you need for you to be able to achieve your results. And again, it's about that sphere of influence. You can present all those external factors that might influence the results, and you could maybe show at what point in the process you expect them to have an influence. There's many ways to present a theory of change, so you can have a look online and see what kind of things that you might find online. We ask you to be creative here and use a format that works best for you. Some people like to use digital tools to develop theory of change. So you can use PowerPoint as a kind of basic tool, but there's lots of other options out there. You can also use pen and paper or workshop it on whiteboards with your team. But for the purposes of the application, you should ensure that the version you submit is in PDF format, and that if it's a pen and paper theory of change that you've taken a photograph of, you need to make sure that that text is legible in the PDF that you upload. We recommend that you just submit this as 1 to 2 pages of PDF max, because you should be able to give that overview of your project in that amount of space. 1 page would be ideal though. We see this as a tool that you can revisit and revise throughout the project. We know it's not simple to come up with a theory of change. What we want to see is your thought process so far in the design of your project. At the application stage, the expert committee will be looking to see if you've presented a logical flow and thought about the external factors that might influence your project. So I think I'll just take a pause for breath here, but it would be really great to hear from those of you who said you've got quite a lot of experience in MEL to let us know in the chat what kind of MEL tools do you use, and particularly for theory of change, what have you used in the past for developing your theory of change? I'll read out a few of your responses. So for instance, has anybody used any other digital tools that, apart from PowerPoint? So we have Stephen has suggested Miro and Henry. So this sounds like it's quite a popular tool. So this is an online platform. I believe that you can also use post-it notes and that kind of thing. So it's the kind of digital post-it note system. We've got another vote for Miro, and you use it for group discussions. Yes, so this is something we would recommend is doing it. Creating a theory of change is a very collaborative process. Ideally, you should be involving the stakeholders that you're working with as well in a theory of change, so that they have some influence over the project that that's going to affect them. We have Jambo board. I've not heard of that one, but it reminds me of Google Jamboard, which is similar to Miro. Yeah, looks like Miro is a popular tool. So I think you can go check out that tool because it's quite a useful software. It's free to use. I think that we've got another vote for Jamboard. That's great. Thanks a lot for sharing, everybody. And if any other tools come up, please feel free to post in the chat and let others know what you prefer to use. Okay, so coming onto the benefits of theory of change. As I mentioned, it's a really useful design and strategic planning tool. Your project team and stakeholders can work on it together, so you have that shared understanding of a project and you can work out all those different elements. It really helps to clarify your understanding of how your activities that you're planning are actually going to lead to outputs and impact, and maybe you need to adapt what you originally thought. You can identify any of those hidden assumptions and how important they are. There might be some things behind there in when you start to discuss with your team that you hadn't thought about. And it can help you already start to think about you're going to need to measure to support your evaluation activities and your monitoring activities. And most of all, it's that time to have that critical reflection and rethinking of your approaches. Obviously, it's also a very helpful communication tool because it's visual, and it can give that very quick summary of the project's aims. That's why we ask for you to do it in a 1 to 2 page format, and I think that's quite normal in most monitoring, evaluation, and learning plans. You would have something like that to give that quick overview of what your project's about. It also gives a confidence to external parties. So in this case, it would be the Ocean Expert Committee, that you've understood what your pathway to change is and that you've identified the assumptions that you're making on that pathway to actually achieving change. And it can highlight and describe a very complex or non-linear process of change, because you're able to be quite flexible in how you present it visually. You can add arrows and cycles where you think that might be appropriate, or you can show in areas where maybe activities lead to more than one outcome. It can also help to improve your partnerships with the other people involved in the project, because they have a say in the project design. And just to point out, so in these diagrams that we've presented as examples, and these are in our MEL guidance as well, here we have intermediate outcomes noted in the diagram, and this is an option that you could use, but it's not something you need to show. Like if you don't see there's an intermediate outcome that not necessarily pops out, this is up to you. Because in our log frames, we just ask for one outcome and then your outputs. So just be aware, like, we're very flexible about what kind of thing you show us with your theory of change, and you can feel free to be creative and present it in a way that makes most sense for you and your project. Okay, on to LogFrame. So I'm going to give a very quick overview of LogFrame right now before we dive into the details of developing a LogFrame. But just simply for those that haven't got the experience of using this kind of tool, a logical framework is also, which we also term a log frame. It's a tool for monitoring and evaluating your performance. So this is used to track your actual results against what you've planned by using a series of things called indicators, baselines, and targets. So this is the place to dive into the details of what you've put in your pathway to change and your theory of change, and think about the nuts and bolts of how you're actually going to monitor how you move from your inputs all the way up to your impact. As I mentioned before, Ocean will provide the templates. So we have a Word and Excel template available on the application portal on FlexiGrant. So you can go there and download the templates and use those to start filling out your log frames. You must upload a log frame in one of those templates, or your application may be deemed ineligible. So we want to make the assessment process very fair, so we ask that you use the same template so that the Ocean Expert Committee has a sort of a fair way of assessing the quality of your proposals. It's also just really important not to leave this to the last minute, because it is one of the key things that the committee will use to assess your application, as it really outlines all of the details of how your project works. So here's just a quick screenshot of what the Excel template looks like. We offer both Word and Excel. It would be interesting to hear from people in the chat what they're used to using in log frames, from those who are more experienced. What we know is that a lot of people prefer to use the Word document because it's very helpful for collaborating. You can use track changes to discuss with your team and leave comments and annotations. And then other people prefer to use the Excel template because they find it easier to add in their targets and update those on a regular basis. So it's up to you. We have no preference about which you use. Just choose what's best for you, and you might want to keep both for different purposes internally, but we just need one. So just upload one of those with your application. Yeah. So we just want to summarize why the log frame is important for your application. It's a way of structuring those main elements in the project and highlighting the logical linkages between them. It provides very clear statements of your overall objectives and expected results. And it starts to lay out all of the activities that you're going to deliver and help set that framework for monitoring them using targets and baselines. Here again, you're going to set out the risks and assumptions to monitor, but you're going to do that at every point. So for every output and outcome, you can identify the specific risks and assumptions related to those. And again, it's another way of communicating to help explain your work to other people. And because it's so detailed, it can be very useful in your project team so that you can understand like who's got the roles and responsibilities for which elements of the project. So what is the logic of the log frame? Well, this is just kind of this is also relevant to your theory of change, but it's just to think about how everything runs into each other. So you're going to start off with your project activities. And if your project activities are successful and your assumptions about that activity holds true, then you're going to achieve your outputs. So here we have an example. Run 5 summer reading camps is the activity. And then the assumption is that the parents of children with low reading proficiency are willing to send them to camp. So if the parents are willing, then they will achieve their output, which is that their students with low reading proficiency will complete the summer camp. So just to kind of bring this up to the next level, you would be then thinking about what assumption about that output will help you is necessary for you to be able to achieve your outcome. Now, the reason I'm telling you about this is because we don't want to see a list of unrelated activities, outputs, and outcomes. They need to feed into each other. So, like, does your activity naturally lead to the particular output that you've put? And does that output have a good chance of achieving the outcome, or helping to contribute to achieving that outcome? Because you might have multiple outputs leading to achieve the particular outcome. So just coming on to the definitions for those that might not be so familiar with log frames. We talk about outputs, and when we talk about outputs, these are the specific and direct deliverables produced by undertaking project activities. And for each of your outputs, we ask you to supply indicators, and these can be quantitative or qualitative ways of judging your progress. We also ask for means of verification. So this is the sources of evidence that you're going to use to verify your progress against these indicators. And we ask you to, again, map out the assumptions that you're making. Your activities are those specific tasks that you carry out to be able to produce those outputs. So because these are just activities, we don't need you to provide indicators or sources of evidence for these. This is not going to be required. So from output level, you move up to outcome level. So outcome is the change that occurs if the outputs are achieved. And these are going to be needing indicators as well. And you also have to provide means of verification and assumptions. So for Ocean, we only ask for one project outcome. So this is what we want you to achieve by the end of the project. And for impact, there should also just be one impact statement, which is your ultimate result, which might be what your project is contributing to, but might not necessarily be able to achieve within the lifetime of the project. This is kind of the broader goal that you're working towards. Um, to sort of summarize how these three tools really work together, you've got your pathway to change, theory of change, and the log frame, but they all express the logic of your project in different ways. The pathway of change helps you to make the case for your project in a narrative way, explaining the why and explaining the what and the how, and using the vocabulary of the impact, outcomes, outputs, and activities. This can be really helpful if you need to write a short summary of your project, like it's basically the project in a nutshell, but also showing how the change is going to come about. In some cases, this is called the narrative theory of change, but we call it the pathway to change here at Ocean. The theory of change diagram, this is really helping you to present it in a structured way. So it's the same information, but laid out in a visual way. In the log frame, you're going to be describing how you're tracking your progress against your stated activities, and it's a really strong monitoring tool. So the resulting evidence from that can then provide the basis for refining your narrative in the pathway to change, and refining how you structure the logical flow in your theory of change. Working on these tools really helps to refine your thinking and approach about the project, because it can help you to identify any gaps and in your understanding of how the project's going to work, and help you to strengthen the design ultimately. You might realize that the activities that you proposed originally might not be the best way to bring about the change that you're aiming for, so you can then adapt before you submit your application. And you're using any insights from this kind of workshopping your theory of change diagram in tools like Miro, or using post-its, that kind of thing. These things can really feed into improving your project design overall.